It really is going to save the world. Yeah. There are 6 reasons why I think sharing is really going to save the world. One is that sharing is something that helps to meet our needs. So when we're taxed, when we're running out of time, running out of resources personally, sharing is something that can help give resources back to us. Another thing about sharing is that it's fun, it has a lot of perks. It's not like recycling and composting. It's like, all right, here's a new lifestyle change that we kind of have to start implementing. It's like people are going to want to share because it's going to make their lives better and more interesting and more fun. And another thing that sharing can help us do is that all of our sort of isolated acts of changing the world, doing all of these things on our own is a lot of work. But when we can get together as a community and collectively build a solar water heater or collectively build a gray water system that we can share, it just makes so much more sense. So a 4th thing about sharing, which makes it extra powerful, is that it's contagious. So this happened with my neighbor who I used to not know very well. I offered him some plums from our trees. After that, he started giving us tomatoes. It just starts to open up the doors of generosity. Another great thing about sharing is that we don't have to wait. With sharing, we can just start today. So we can all be empowered to do it, and that's the sixth thing, is that everybody can share it. You don't have to be rich, and you don't have to have any special skills, really. So everybody can share. That's what makes it a really powerful tool to change the world.
We're really excited when we talk to law students, because when they find out about our organization, they say, oh my gosh, this is exactly the kind of work I want to do. I don't want to go off and work for a big law firm. I want to be part of changing our economy and making our economy more sustainable.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaia Donaldson. I'm in Oakland, California, a place where a lot of innovation is happening, and I'm with a couple of innovators. My guests today are Jennie Kassin, Janelle Orsi, who are co-directors of the Sustainable Economies Law Center, which sounds like something that's just right at the forward edge of what we all need, sustainable economies, absolutely. Janelle, I'm going to start with you. You're the author of a book called The Sharing Solution. Show us.
The Sharing Solution, yes. Here you go.
Tell us about how to save money, simplify your life, build community. You did it with Emily Doskow. Thank you for that. What led you to write a book which includes stuff that helps people make agreements and so on? Why did you write a book about sharing?
Well, I became a lawyer about 4 years ago, and my whole purpose in becoming a lawyer was to make the world a better place. And there's a lot of different ways that people go about that. But at the time, I was living in a unique community. We called it casual cohousing, and this was in Berkeley. And I lived there for 6 years, and it was 4 neighboring households. And on the surface, we looked like a regular neighborhood. But we just shared a lot of things. So we shared meals a couple times a week. I did my gardening at my neighbor's house. I did laundry at my neighbor's house. We all shared a vacuum. My housemate shared a pickup truck with some other families. So there was a lot of sharing going on. And at some point I realized, sharing, that's a really great way to sort of take the resources in our communities, of which there are many resources. It's just the way that we use them is very inefficient sometimes. But that's a good way to help people meet their needs. So things like cars sit around a lot of the time. We don't use them most of the time. Like, we should be sharing those kinds of things. And then housing, rather than building our cities and sprawling out and into the rural areas, I think we could be coming up with creative ways to share housing and share space and sharing household goods. We don't all need to have a vacuum cleaner. We could walk it across the street to our neighbor's house every other week, and that's not a huge inconvenience. So I just started to really fixate it on this idea of sharing, but really we don't live in a culture where sharing is common.
No, so. not at this time. And we're in a consumer culture, right? And so we are encouraged by the corporate powers that be and to everybody, every household have everything for themselves.
Yeah.
And certainly, 80 years ago in the Depression, people shared much more because they were used to it. There was a culture. So sounds like part of what I sense in your book is helping to encourage a culture of sharing,
Right,
which
yes.
makes an awful lot of sense with an economic depression that we're in,
Right, exactly.
especially.
Yes. So yes, there isn't a culture of sharing. I think that when you start to suggest the idea of sharing, it does make sense sort of logically, but then a lot of fears come up for people. And some of it relates to conflict, and then some of it relates to legal issues. And since I was on the verge of becoming a lawyer, I thought, well, I could focus my law practice on all the legal issues that come up. So as a lawyer in my private law practice, I help people form agreements to say maybe share ownership of a car or share ownership of a house, and help people form organizations like cooperatively owned businesses or co-housing communities, and then also just help them sort through all of the regulatory issues that come up or help them figure out the tax issues. And so, so the sharing solution is a do-it-yourself guide to a lot of these things, because not everybody's going to need a lawyer to help them share, but they're going to need some basic guidance and maybe some sample agreements. And I see sharing as happening on many different levels. There's sort of at the first level, there's the casual ways that people share with each other, which might just be sharing a meal or giving somebody a ride, so ride sharing, carpooling. And these are things that don't take a lot of planning. I mean, everybody can do these things. It's like we know how to do these things. I think what our society needs is kind of the impetus or the push to just do a lot more of this, because I think that'll start to build sharing into our culture. So rather than trying to meet all of our needs by going out and buying something, we'll have the idea to maybe knock on our neighbor's door and ask. So that's kind of the first level of sharing. But what the sharing solution is about is starting to make our sharing arrangements bringing them a little bit deeper, making agreements with each other or forming organizations. So those are kind of the second and third level. So at the second level, we make agreements that are more durable. So you agree to maybe share ownership of a car with somebody.
Sure.
Or agree to share a vacuum. And once that agreement's there, you know you can rely on it to meet your needs.
I think
So-
that quality of, you could count on it. I think it's part of why we all go out or buy a vacuum is because at the moment you drop your hat that you decide impulsively at the last minute to do the vacuum.
Yeah.
So I think there's a little more planning that will be involved, and of course relationships
Yes.
for those durable things. And cars, of course.
Yeah.
Like what happens if somebody gets a
Is in
fender
an
bender?
accident. Yeah, that's right.
Which I know you dealt with that
Yeah.
in here.
Yeah, so the book is kind of organized by topic area. There's transportation, ways that we can share cars or share rides. And then housing, there's food, child care and elder care, work, and household goods, stuff. And then there's also just a lot of tools in there to help people figure out what is our agreement going to look like. One chapter is the 20 questions you should ask when you share.
Yes.
And it's things like who's responsible for what, who's paying what happens if something goes wrong, how are we going to make decisions, what happens when our sharing arrangement ends. And so when people sit down and talk about all these things, they get on the same page. It helps to prevent conflicts that could come up, because that, I think, is a fear for a lot of people is what is going to happen if we get into a fight, or what happens if we get in a car accident. And we shouldn't be afraid of these things, because they are going to happen. The sharing arrangement is going to end, probably.
At some point, lives change and so on. I think what I was really impressed at with your 20 questions is you have just sort of turned over every rock. There's a thoroughness to this that I think that people doing it sort of shooting from the hip won't have necessarily thought through all the way. And that's it's a real gift to all of us. I want to go back to your thoughts here. You talked about more casual sharing, and then a little more formalized, like a car sharing.
Making an agreement.
Keep going.
Yeah.
You have some more ideas
So
there.
I sort of think of a third and a fourth level too of sharing and how we can begin to integrate it into our society. And I should say that these are levels we should be working on simultaneously. So this is not a stage of progression. I think this is, if we have all these four levels sort of implemented in our society, I think we can feel comfortable that sharing can meet our needs. So at the third level is forming organizations, because organizations are entities that exist whether or not individuals can come and go, and the organization is still going to exist. And that's a way to make sharing more of an institution in our communities.
Can you give me some examples
So,
of those?
A tool lending library, a car sharing club where might be a group of 10 people sharing 3 cars. One of those people could leave and the car sharing club is still there. A co-housing community. So as an attorney, that's a lot of times where I come in, is helping people figure out, are you going to be a nonprofit organization? Do you want to form a limited liability company? And so that's, as a sharing lawyer, what I do. But that's sort of the third level of sharing. And at the fourth level of sharing, it's sort of taking our cities and building sharing into the infrastructure.
Wow.
So like citywide car
visionary.
sharing programs, citywide bicycle sharing programs, maybe rethinking our public library system to include tools. This is in Oakland and Berkeley, we have tool lending libraries, and kind of at the citywide level. And so at the fourth level, you kind of have many players involved, many stakeholders who are cooperating and really kind of making it, building it into the structure of the city. So.
You know, as you described that, I think that one could have a vision of, particularly in an urban area, but not necessarily only there, all kinds of different sharing situations that someone could avail themselves of in many, many aspects of our lives. It seems to me, I mean, the notion, which I had first heard from you, is to move ourselves from a consumer culture to a sharing culture, from a consumer economy to I mean, we're on the way to something else.
To a sharing economy.
And so sharing economy sure sounds, I mean, I'd rather be in that world than sort of every man, you know, for himself kind of an attitude here.
Yeah. And there's so many reasons to do it, and I think a lot of people are coming at it from an ecological standpoint of wanting to reduce their carbon footprint, but then a lot of people, it just makes so much economic sense. It takes that burden off to earn a lot of money so you can meet all of your needs. And then from a personal standpoint, and from having lived in sharing communities and just, you know, being very open to sharing, it just makes life fun. And you connect with people, you build
I think
community.
the relationship side is something you know, one of the perhaps unintended consequences of our separate little houses with all of their separate stuff is that kind of loneliness and sense of distrust because this person's a stranger. And so I see this as a way to re-knit our connections to one another.
Yeah, right.
We'll go back to sharing and livelihood in a little bit, but I want to also bring Jennie into the story. Since you two are co-directors of the Sustainable Economies Law Center, what is that? It's an interesting name. You tell me.
So I heard about Janelle because of her book. She's very famous around here because of her book, and not just around here, but especially around here. And I said, wow, here's a lawyer who's doing some really interesting legal work trying to promote a healthier, more sustainable economy. And I was actually doing a similar kind of work. I didn't call it sharing law, but what I was really interested in, and I'm still really interested in, is community development. So I tracked down Janelle and we talked, and we realized that we really did have a lot in common in terms of the kinds of work we wanted to do. So we joined forces and started the Sustainable Economies Law Center. And what it does is it tries to look at almost every aspect of our economy that you can think of and how we can make it more healthy, more sustainable, more about sharing, more localized so that we keep more of our resources local and locally controlled. And so we have 5 areas that we focus on. One is food and agriculture. Another one is cooperatives, which includes all kinds of cooperatives, whether it be worker cooperatives, producer cooperatives, consumer cooperatives. Then we also look at something that we call community-supported enterprise. And that's looking at ways that local communities can actually invest in local business. So
I am eager. I mean, I'm interrupting you only because we've raised that question in our own community. How do we help get some investment funding and support for local? Carry on, but it's like, yes, we'll go back to that.
Yes. And then a 4th area is local currency. So that's ways that we can facilitate exchange without necessarily having to rely on the dollar, which is inherently scarce. And then housing, so looking at some of the things Janelle was talking about, like co-housing, creative ways that people can share housing so that they can live in a more sharing and sustainable way.
So, I mean, obviously, I see there's lots of overlaps in here. As lawyers working in those areas, can you give me some examples of some things you're doing or have been doing or dream to do in a couple of those areas?
Sure. Well, I think sort of the core issue that comes up is that we're completely reorganizing our relationships. And we have a lot of relationships that are very typical in the society between employer and employee, between investor and business. And those there's a lot of regulations that protect people from each other. So, I mean, Jennie could give an example of what happens with investors and why it's so hard to invest.
Yeah, tell us that, because it feels like
that's
worlds apart.
Exactly. There are, in every area, there are so many examples. With investors, there's tons of protections for investors. And these were all passed in the 30s after the big stock market crash. And it's gotten to, with all the regulations, it's actually pretty much illegal for me to invest in a small locally owned business. If I have extra money to invest, the only place I can really put it is either in a bank, which is great if there's a local community bank, but if I want to invest it in business, in an equity type of investment where I maybe might get a higher return, my only option is to put it in like a mutual fund on the stock market.
Which
so
is
the money
local.
immediately leaves the community.
Right.
It's in big multinational corporations. Even when you put it in a socially responsible investment fund, if you look at what's in those funds, it's really, big corporations that maybe are a little bit better than the worst of the worst, but
they're not necessarily helping us to have more farmers or
it's shipping money right out of the community. I was just looking in Alameda County where we're located. There's $166 billion in assets that are in some type of investment, like a mutual fund, a bank account, those kinds of investments, just sitting there in a bank account or in a mutual fund. Even if we just put a tiny percentage of that back into our local economy, it could have a huge impact. But there are all these legal constraints on our ability to do that. So that's one issue we're looking at, trying to figure out ways to help people be able to invest in the local economy. And then also we're doing some advocacy work to see if we can change the laws.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah, I was going to say, somehow some of those laws didn't protect a whole lot of people from being hurt when the 2008 crash hit. But I understand the need to try and do that. But we now need to enable a different economy.
Exactly.
When a financial collapse happens, I was reading the other days, what happens is you have many new, smaller, and generally poorer economies. Well, we need to bring that money back home.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
In fact, that brings us around to the whole area of livelihood, different relationships that you were talking about.
Right.
And I know that that's a pet way of thinking in a different way for you, Janelle. Tell us about livelihood.
Yeah, it's a concept that I've just come to sort of obsess about because I think the traditional way, or these days, it's not traditional at all, in fact, is that we have jobs. And I think it's 92% of people, or was it 97? Anyways, a lot of people, that's how they kind of meet their needs, is they go do a job, which usually means working for somebody else, and then they get the money so that they can buy things that they need. And I think that as a predominant model of meeting our needs is going to sort of shift. We're going to shift away from that and be able to meet our needs through very small enterprise, localized enterprise, and then cooperative enterprises or cooperative projects. And I had mentioned the employment laws and why that's a barrier, and just an example of how people are kind of collaboratively meeting their needs. Like if you have a group of people that comes together to form a cooperative grocery, so they're purchasing food, they might be buying food directly from farmers in bulk in order to get low prices, and then they divvy it up among themselves. So they're sort of like a grocery store. But a lot of times the way that these co-ops work is that people volunteer a few hours a month to kind of keep everything going, so fill orders and that kind of thing. But most of the time, that's illegal to have people volunteering because they should be treated as employees, be paid minimum wage, have workers' comp insurance, and all of these kind of very high barriers that just don't make sense in the context of these cooperative projects.
So is that an area where laws need to be changed again? Or is it, I see.
So we're going to be spending a lot of time thinking about that this summer especially. And I think in general, Jennie and I have so many situations where people tell us about something wonderful they want to do. It just makes so much sense. It's a cooperative project, or it's a local business that's going to be locally funded. Yes. And we're always saying, sorry, what you want to do is completely illegal. And we're always the naysayers, and we don't want to be like that. We really want to be able to enable people to do that. And some of it's giving people guidance, like here's how you do it. But there are we run up against barriers that are just too high, and that's where we're trying to change the laws. Yeah.
And I hope that there's a lot of others springing up from the grassroots like yourselves. Are there any organizations beginning to form, or at least conversations starting about the things you're concerned about, I'm hoping.
Around the legal issues, well, that's the Sustainable Economies Law Center. But I will say, just in the time that we formed, it was a year and a half ago, so this was the end of 2009 that we formed. People have come out of the woodwork from all over the country. Like just today, I got an email from a lawyer in Los Angeles who says, "This is exactly what I want to be doing." And
Right.
and so it's really heartening. I mean, I think everyone around the country is thinking about how to make this work, and then just realizing, oh, there are legal barriers. What do we do next?
And a lot of the work we do is with law student interns. So they actually work for us for free over the summer and sometimes during the semester, the school year as well. And we're really excited when we talk to law students because when they find out about our organization, they say, oh my gosh, this is exactly the kind of work I want to do. I don't want to
Good.
go off and work for a big law firm. I want to be part of changing our economy and making our economy more sustainable.
I imagine that's got to be encouraging. I mean, you're both young
yeah.
folks, and so more young folks because you're the ones that are having to ground a culture that we can all live in, because the one that we've been used to is dying.
Yeah.
So we're kind of looking to you, actually.
Yeah, and in fact, a wonderful thing that happened is the American Bar Association took notice of what we're doing, and here's the biggest association of lawyers in the country, and now they've asked us to write a book about it. So there will be a book called Sharing Law,
Sharing Law.
Understanding the legal landscape of the sharing economy, and this is going to provide a lot more how-to tools and practical guides to a lot of the deeper, more difficult
Now,
stuff.
the difficult stuff.
Yeah.
Intended now. Who's your audience for that?
The audience is lawyers and then people who are very interested in doing this themselves. So forming an organization, really facing the legal barriers and figuring it out for themselves.
So what I have of this picture sort of is that this book is for the casual. This is for every person.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
All the way up to folks that are forming organizations and structures and starting to hit the boundaries, hit the barriers.
Yeah.
And that what you're doing in the Sustainable Economies Law Center is then sort of the next level. Is that sort of a reasonable picture of
Right.
this?
Exactly.
So here in our last 5 minutes, are there particular topics we haven't covered that are just hot for you that we want to make sure to do, that you're passionate about?
Well, one thing that I could say is just for people who are watching and kind of wondering, where do I jump into this and how do I start sharing? I mean, there's different kind of people. Some people are organizers, and then other people are just trying to figure out, in my life, what am I going to do? And so I would say for the people just who are trying to figure out in your life, I mean, it is hard to start breaking the ice and sharing. I just want to acknowledge that, that it is hard because we live in a culture where we don't know our neighbors. And I think what we all need to do is just start taking steps that build that culture of sharing. So giving more, if we have extra zucchini from our gardens, give it to the neighbors.
Yes.
Inviting people over for shared meals. I think food is one of the best ways to start greasing the wheels of a sharing culture because it's something we can all relate to. But for people who are more organizers, there's so many ways to just sort of jump in and start helping build the platforms for sharing. So organizing a local tool lending library or even just a tool lending group or creating websites or social networks or listservs for local communities that are focused on sharing, just organizing events around sharing. These are like platforms for sharing. These are places where people come together and share. And then sort of for the more technically minded people, like building the technology that enables sharing, there's thousands of websites now that are out there. They're in development that are going to enable people to share cars or share household goods. And so there's a lot going on in that realm. And then there's another aspect of it, which is just like sort of cultivating our personal skills, our skills for communication. Because I think when it comes down to it, like my biggest fears around sharing is that I am going to get into a conflict with somebody or that I could lose a friend or it's just going to become uncomfortable. I mean, that really is, I think, for a lot of people, the biggest barrier. But when I'm a trained mediator, I've read a lot of books about communication to the point where I sort of feel like I don't have to be scared of that anymore because I realize we can, as humans, we can work through all of these things. And if we get really good at communicating our needs in ways that don't offend people or put them on the defensive, and if we're really good at listening to other people and being open to what they need, I think we can really work out the sharing thing, but I think it's a skill that we all need to cultivate, is our communication.
And I noted that here in the book you've got some resources for people and some things, the questions and stuff, so that there's, it's not, oh my God, you give us some ways to grease the skids on that in here as well.
One thing we did in the book is try to think about some of the most difficult sharing situations you can get into, like you're carpooling and the other person is talking too much. And
yes.
how can you bring that up with them and just ask for some quiet? Like, how do you do that without offending them? And there are ways. I think there really are ways to just ask for what you need. And so, we tried to think through a lot of those things.
That helps. Yeah. The personal touch in this is it just radiates from here. Personal examples and resources. This is not a dull, dry law book. I promise.
It's meant to be a source.
People book.
Yeah. And I used it myself as a lawyer, so it's not just for lay people.
So in our last 2 minutes, for you, Jenny, anything, what inspires you, what you envision?
Well, I would just like to add that there are a lot of organizations out there, lots of resources for people who want to get involved in all of these issues. There are national networks, there's Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, and there are lots of other groups that focus on different aspects of the sharing economy and how to promote it. So you don't necessarily have to start from scratch.
Which reminds me, give us your website, your URL.
So Sustainable Economies Law Center.org is one way to get there, or it's theselc.org.
The Selc.
Yeah, the SELC.org. And for the book, we have it's sharingsolution.com.
Singular.
Sharingsolution.com.
Great, that's wonderful. Thank you for pushing these edges. I will be keeping an eye out for you, for what breakthroughs you can help us all do to create that new culture.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you're watching Peak Moment. I'm Janaia Donaldson. My guests, Jennie Kassin and Janelle Orsi from the Sustainable Economies Law Center. Join us next time.